The war everyone talks about is in Ukraine, but the war that could drag America into direct confrontation with Russia is quietly brewing 200 miles north, in a country most Americans couldn't find on a map 6 months ago. Belarus sits like a dagger pointed at NATO's heart, hosting Russian troops and missiles just 100 miles from Warsaw. While the world watches Ukrainian battlefields, Alexander Lukashenko has been turning his country into Moscow's forward operating base, complete with nuclear-capable weapons and 30,000 Russian soldiers who didn't come for exercises. A farmer in Poland can now see Russian helicopter patrols from his wheat fields. A mother in Lithuania drives her children to school past NATO convoys that weren't there last winter. The frozen conflict between Russia and the West has found new ground to thaw, and it's happening in places where miscalculation means global war. According to Reuters and NATO intelligence assessments, the military buildup in Belarus represents the largest concentration of Russian forces on NATO's borders since the Cold War. These aren't defensive positions, they're staging areas designed for rapid deployment westward. Welcome to Crisis Zone. Today we're examining how two small Eastern European countries have become the potential triggers for the war nobody wants, but everyone seems to be preparing for. Alexander Lukashenko has turned Belarus into something unprecedented in modern European history. A sovereign nation that willingly hosts another country's invasion forces while maintaining the pretense of independence. According to military intelligence reports, Russia has stationed tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus for the first time since the Soviet collapse. These aren't just symbolic deployments, they're battlefield-ready weapons positioned within striking distance of major NATO military installations and population centers. The Iskander missile systems, now positioned near the Polish border, can reach Berlin in 12 minutes. According to NATO missile defense assessments, current European air defense systems couldn't reliably intercept a coordinated Iskander attack launched from Belarus. But the nuclear dimension is only part of a larger military transformation. Russian forces have been constructing permanent infrastructure in Belarus: airfields, communication centers, logistics hubs, and command facilities that suggest long-term rather than temporary deployment. Wagner Group mercenaries, the same fighters who battled in Ukraine, have been training Belarusian military units in combat tactics that mirror Russian operations across the border. According to intelligence analyses, this isn't traditional military assistance but direct integration of Belarusian forces into Russian command structures. The geographic advantages for Russia are enormous. Belarus provides direct access to the Suwałki Gap, the narrow corridor connecting the Baltic states to the rest of NATO. Military planners call this corridor NATO's most vulnerable choke point. If Russian forces cut it, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania could be isolated from Western support within hours. Lukashenko gains domestic political survival from this arrangement, but at the cost of his country's actual independence. According to diplomatic reporting, major military and foreign policy decisions affecting Belarus are now made in Moscow rather than Minsk. The transformation has been gradual enough to avoid triggering immediate NATO responses, but comprehensive enough to fundamentally alter European security architecture. Belarus has become a forward extension of Russian military power, positioned deeper into Europe than any Soviet-era deployment. Here's the mini recap. Belarus has evolved from Russian ally into Russian military platform, hosting nuclear weapons, permanent bases, and integrated command structures that position Russian forces within striking distance of major NATO territories and populations. While international attention focuses on southern and eastern Ukraine, the northern front near Belarus has become a strategic laboratory for escalation that could pull NATO directly into combat operations. According to military situation reports, Ukrainian forces have been conducting cross-border raids into both Russia and Belarus, targeting logistics facilities and military infrastructure that support Russian operations. These raids represent a significant escalation in scope and geographic reach beyond defensive operations. Russian retaliation for these raids has included missile strikes on Ukrainian territory launched from Belarusian bases. According to international law experts, this makes Belarus an active belligerent in the conflict rather than merely a host nation, potentially justifying Ukrainian strikes on Belarusian territory. The escalation ladder becomes dangerous when NATO weapons systems are involved in attacks on Russian allies. Ukrainian forces have used Western-supplied missiles to strike targets in Belarus, creating the technical reality of NATO weapons being used against Russian strategic partners. Moldova represents another potential flashpoint where Ukrainian conflict dynamics could expand. According to intelligence assessments, Russian forces in Transnistria breakaway Moldovan region have been coordinating with Russian units in Ukraine and Belarus, creating a triangular military presence that could encircle Ukrainian forces. Polish authorities have reported increased Russian reconnaissance activity along their border with Belarus, including drone flights and electronic intelligence gathering that suggests targeting for potential future operations. According to NATO intelligence sharing, this reconnaissance indicates Russian contingency planning for westward military operations. The refugee and logistics dimensions create additional complications. NATO countries are providing substantial military aid to Ukraine while hosting millions of Ukrainian refugees. If conflicts expand into Belarus or Moldova, refugee flows could increase dramatically while transportation routes for military assistance become targets for Russian attack. Chemical and nuclear facilities in the region present catastrophic escalation risks. According to nuclear safety monitors, fighting near nuclear installations in Ukraine has already created radiation release dangers. Similar facilities exist in Belarus and Moldova, creating potential for environmental disasters that could affect NATO territories directly. Here's the mini recap. Ukrainian military operations are expanding beyond original conflict boundaries into Belarus and potentially Moldova, creating escalation dynamics that could justify Russian attacks on NATO territories supporting Ukrainian operations. NATO faces a strategic puzzle that has no good solutions: how to deter Russian aggression without providing justification for the very attacks the alliance seeks to prevent. The forward deployment of NATO forces in Eastern Europe serves essential deterrence functions, but it also creates targets that Russian forces in Belarus can strike with minimal warning time. According to military logistics analyses, NATO supply lines and command centers are within range of Russian weapons systems that could attack faster than reinforcements could respond. Article 5 of the NATO Treaty creates legal obligations that may not match military realities. If Russian forces attack NATO territory from Belarus, the alliance is legally bound to respond collectively, but practical response capabilities may be insufficient to prevent rapid territorial losses before effective counterattack. Poland hosts significant NATO infrastructure and American military personnel who would become immediate targets in any westward Russian expansion. According to Defense Department deployments, thousands of American soldiers are stationed within range of Russian weapons systems now positioned in Belarus. The nuclear dimension complicates every aspect of NATO planning. Russian tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus could potentially be used against NATO military targets while avoiding strategic escalation that would trigger massive American nuclear retaliation. Baltic state security depends entirely on NATO reinforcement capabilities that Russian forces in Belarus are positioned to disrupt. According to military planning assessments, defending Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania would require rapid movement of NATO forces through territory that Russian weapons can interdict from Belarusian positions. Intelligence sharing among NATO members has revealed Russian contingency planning for limited attacks on NATO logistics facilities calculated to disrupt alliance operations without triggering full-scale war. These plans exploit legal and political ambiguities about proportional response to limited aggression. The domestic political pressures within NATO countries complicate military planning. European populations show limited appetite for major military confrontation with Russia, while American voters remain skeptical of extensive overseas military commitments following lengthy campaigns in Iraq and Afghanistan. Economic warfare dimensions create additional strategic complications. Russian attacks on European energy infrastructure could accomplish strategic objectives without direct military confrontation with NATO forces, making traditional deterrence less applicable to likely threat scenarios. Here's the mini recap. NATO's deterrence strategies face Russian countermeasures that exploit geographic advantages, nuclear ambiguity, political divisions, and economic vulnerabilities that traditional military planning wasn't designed to address effectively. While military planners focus on battlefield scenarios, European civilian populations are discovering they're dramatically unprepared for the kinds of conflicts that could emerge from current tensions. Finland and Sweden have maintained comprehensive civil defense systems throughout the post-Cold War period, including shelter networks and emergency supplies that could protect significant portions of their populations. According to civil defense assessments, these Nordic countries could sustain civilian populations during extended conflicts. Most other European NATO members have allowed civil defense capabilities to atrophy since the 1990s. According to European Union emergency preparedness studies, countries like Germany, France, and the Netherlands lack adequate shelter space, emergency supplies, or communication systems for wartime civilian protection. Poland has been rapidly expanding civil defense capabilities since the Ukraine conflict began, including renovation of Soviet-era shelters and construction of new emergency facilities. According to Polish government reports, these efforts could provide basic protection for urban populations during short-term conflicts. The Baltic states face particular challenges due to their geographic proximity to Russian forces and limited strategic depth for civilian evacuation. According to regional security analyses, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania would need to evacuate civilian populations westward within hours of conflict initiation, requiring coordination that current systems cannot provide. Energy infrastructure vulnerability creates cascading civilian protection challenges. Russian attacks on power grids would eliminate heating, water treatment, and communication systems that civilian populations need for survival during winter months. Medical system preparations vary dramatically across Europe. According to healthcare emergency planning studies, some countries have maintained surge capacity for mass casualty situations, while others have optimized medical systems for efficiency rather than emergency response. Food distribution systems throughout Europe depend on just-in-time logistics that would break down immediately during major conflicts. According to supply chain vulnerability assessments, most European cities maintain less than 1 week of food supplies, creating potential for rapid humanitarian crises. Communication network resilience has improved in some areas but remains vulnerable in others. According to telecommunications security studies, redundant communication systems exist for military and government use, but civilian population warning systems lack adequate backup capabilities in many regions. The refugee integration challenge multiplies existing vulnerabilities. European countries already hosting Ukrainian refugees would face additional displacement if conflicts expanded, potentially overwhelming existing support systems and creating competition for limited resources. Here's the mini recap. European civil defense capabilities vary dramatically, with some countries maintaining comprehensive protection systems, while others lack basic shelter, supply, communication, medical, and logistics capabilities needed for civilian survival during modern conflicts. The possibility of European conflict expanding beyond Ukraine creates preparation challenges that extend to American communities through alliance obligations, economic relationships, and global supply chain dependencies. American military families with deployments in Eastern Europe should understand that these assignments now carry significantly higher risk levels than traditional peacekeeping or training missions. According to military family support organizations, emergency communication plans and deployment contingency preparations are essential for families with service members in the region. Economic preparation should account for potential disruption of European trade relationships that affect American businesses and employment. According to international trade analyses, conflicts that interrupt European economic activity would reduce American export markets and increase costs for imported goods. Energy market volatility would affect American consumers through global price mechanisms even if American energy production remains unaffected, according to energy market studies. European conflicts would drive up worldwide energy costs regardless of domestic American energy independence. Supply chain diversification becomes important for American businesses that depend on European suppliers or markets. Companies should develop alternative sourcing strategies and market relationships that could function during extended European conflicts. Financial preparation should account for market volatility and currency fluctuations that would accompany major European conflicts. According to financial planning research, portfolio diversification and emergency fund maintenance provide protection against geopolitical market disruptions. Community resilience building helps prepare for potential economic and social disruptions that could result from American military involvement in European conflicts. Strong local networks and resource-sharing capabilities maintain stability when external systems become unreliable. The most important preparation may be psychological, accepting that European conflicts could require American military involvement through NATO obligations, potentially affecting American communities in ways not experienced since World War II. Here's the mini recap. American preparation for European conflict expansion requires military family contingency planning, economic diversification, energy cost preparation, supply chain alternatives, financial protection, community resilience building, and psychological readiness for potential American military involvement through alliance obligations. The frozen conflict between Russia and NATO has found new flashpoints in Belarus and Ukraine that could trigger the direct confrontation both sides claim to want to avoid. Geographic proximity, nuclear weapons placement, and escalating military operations are creating conditions where miscalculation becomes catastrophe faster than diplomatic solutions can emerge. Belarus has evolved from neutral buffer state into Russian forward operating base, while Ukrainian operations are expanding beyond original conflict boundaries. NATO faces deterrence challenges that exploit legal ambiguities and geographic vulnerabilities that traditional alliance planning didn't anticipate. European civil defense preparations vary dramatically, with some populations protected and others vulnerable to conflicts that could expand rapidly beyond current geographic boundaries. American communities face potential consequences through military deployment risks, economic disruptions, and alliance obligations that could require unprecedented commitment levels. The communities and nations that navigate these emerging risks successfully will be those that prepare comprehensively rather than optimistically, that build resilience across multiple domains rather than assuming current tensions will resolve peacefully. Subscribe to Crisis Zone and join Americans who understand that European conflicts create American consequences through alliance relationships, economic connections, and military commitments that bring distant wars into domestic communities. Because while we can't control what happens in Minsk or Kiev, we can control how well we prepare for the world they're creating.